Chapter 17, Big Trucks, Scalpels, and Miss May. Since we tend to define chapters in life by our occupation, let's begin there. After leaving my last employer due to the issues I described in that chapter, I received word of a potential opening. It was in a field that was very new to me. I dabbled in it like most people have. I just never thought it might be what I would do to support my family. A local family's owned a car dealership for 3 or 4 generations now. I was told they might be looking for a guy to do some detail work for them. I filled out an application and left it on Dan's desk. I wanted to hand it to him personally, but he was out of the office that day. But it's a small town, and I think he knew who I was. We had purchased a car from him in the past. After a short discussion, I was hired. I learned techniques for cleaning cars that I wasn't aware of. I was able to stay busy and feel like I contributed. There was plenty to learn, but I didn't catch on the way I would have liked to. The urge and need to get away from the environment at my last job, that the way it left me in a strange place emotionally, was strong. I made do, but the skills were foreign to me. As I've mentioned before, and I will mention the disorder as it comes into my story and my day-to-day life. You may remember, as long as I kept moving, things were in order in my mind. Shortly after starting work at the dealership, a longtime employee there retired. He's a tremendous guy and as genuine and kind as they come. He's part of the reason I found out that they had an opening come up and that I started to work there in the first place. So he retired, but how did that affect me? He worked in the parts department, but also went through town with another driver to drop off and pick up customers' cars that were being serviced. In other words, I was now being asked to ride along in a car for portions of my day. I would love to tell you that I handled that request well. The bitter truth is, I did not handle it well. There was no way for me to explain how tense I got just driving around town. The guys joke with me saying, "Oh, that's an easy job. You'll get used to it." In their defense, they had no idea what battle was raging in my mind. Only someone with that disorder would know those things. To go on a simple car ride across town, even once, simply ruined my day. If any of those guys read this, I hope this explains a few things that had to seem incredibly strange to them. I was simply not myself. I was disappointed for being weak enough to sit down for 10 minutes while also feeling weak for letting this disorder rule my world. You get it. And I'm ready to talk about something else for a while. The way I allowed that disorder to shape and control me in those days is still deeply upsetting to me. I hope in the years since then I've repaired any damage I did of my image with them. I believe I have, but I was just not myself. That disorder will do that. Please don't be fooled into thinking you are in control if that's you and your world. Because I'll tell you, you're not. Trust me, I know. One day, while I was in the wash bay at the dealership, I looked out and saw a large truck going by. It was a tandem dump truck owned by a local concrete ready-mix company. It was a locally owned third-generation company. The 2 newest owners were brothers that I'd grown up with. Brad was the oldest of the 2 and a couple years older than me. Chris was the younger of the brothers and a few years younger than me. So, I knew both of them and was between them in age. I heard they'd started doing a little outside concrete work, not just selling concrete and materials like they always had. I thought, hey, I might be a good fit. It'd be physical work that was outside. Since I knew them, it all just kind of fit. It was worth a shot going down there to talk to them. They were on the same page I was and could use a hand, so my career at Dahl's Concrete began. I signed on to be on the concrete work crew, but eventually got my Class B CDL. Basically, I could drive a smaller single-axle dump truck as well as the tandem dump trucks like I saw out the window that day. If you're keeping up, you may be wondering something right now. If I had an issue driving around town for the dealership, how could driving a dump truck be any different? Good job if you're thinking like that, because I certainly thought that. So please let me explain. When I first signed on at Dahl's, I was strictly on a work crew. After a couple months, Chris said a raise in pay came with a CDL. That made sense, since I'd be more valuable to the company. It wouldn't be my primary job, but I'd be licensed if they needed me. Fair enough. I tested and passed and received my new license. If I'm completely transparent, though, the concrete crew was difficult work. This was one of the first times I could tell this disorder was getting to me physically. I never, and I mean never, had a hard day's work get to me. Sure, I tried like everyone else, but not getting exhausted was something I could do. But there, my body was hurting when I pushed it. I couldn't recover anymore the way I used to. So one day, I went to Brad's office and told him how much it was beginning to get to me. I don't know if he realized it or not, but I was ashamed that day. What in the world was wrong with me? What had I allowed to happen to me? Actually, I knew the answer. I just didn't want to hear it. Can you relate? Looking back, I see something else going on, though. I didn't see it at the time, but I do now. The stronghold and the disorder had on my life, well, that stronghold was beginning to crack. It was like a tiny crack in glass that you only see if the light hits it just right. It was a small crack, but it was still a crack. When I decided to get my CDL, I knew it might mean I would drive sometimes, and therefore have to sit. Sitting was avoided at all costs, as you know, but I was finally seeing how absurd that was. Everywhere I went, this disorder tried to ruin my life. If there was a rock bottom, well, I'd finally hit it. If I'd been running, I was so exhausted that I couldn't run anymore. Just because someone has hit rock bottom doesn't mean that they won't spend some time there. I was on the bottom, but I guess I decided to stay a while to check out the scenery. I wasn't crazy about the idea of sitting and driving, but I was crazy about my family. Getting extra pay to drive on occasion was the best for them, so count me in. The battle was far, far, far from over, but the first crack had appeared. I'm sure Chris and Brad had no idea what happened inside me when they offered me more pay if I got my CDL. They couldn't have known, because I wasn't aware of it either. The crack had appeared, and that was significant. I've already written about the boys coming into our lives and making us a tight-knit family of 4. Julie and I were truly blessed by God in those days when it came to the temperament and health of Luke and Jack. Those two were quite a pair. We have some family videos of just ordinary nights that we spent together as a family. I wanted them to have a record of day-to-day life, as many people do, what it was like for them as they grew up. Luke had always been so laid back about most aspects of life. Don't get me wrong, he had passions about trains when he was really young, which turned to airplanes later in life. He was an amazing drummer, too, who earned a scholarship at OCC to play with them. His talent with those drums always amazed me. Jack was always our fiery one. That boy wouldn't sit still. Ever. We nicknamed him Snack Jack for a while. He wouldn't sit still long enough to even eat all his supper. Julie wouldn't throw it out, of course. She would scoot his plate to the edge of the table after supper and leave it for a few minutes. Jack would run around and play a while, but return periodically just for a bite of food. That boy went a mile a minute. Putting those two together was perfect. It would be easy to assume they wouldn't get along since their temperaments were so different, but the opposite was true. Each of them balanced the other out. They were very close and still remain close to this day. If you have children, I don't need to tell you how special that is. Julie and I did our best to guide them, but those two bonded in a way we certainly don't deserve credit for, and it makes my heart happy to this day, for sure. Now, I told you that so I could tell you this. Part of the title for this chapter is Miss May. May I tell you that story now? One evening, Julie asked me to sit down on the couch. She had something she wanted to share with me. Thankfully, she didn't linger long before telling me, because I had no idea what she was about to share. With a little tear in her eye, she told me she was pregnant with our 3rd child. All right, woohoo! Are you kidding me? "Why are you crying, though? It wasn't a happy tear, really." It didn't look to me like it was, anyway. After she saw my reaction, she was relieved. It seemed I had shared, on many occasions, how great I thought our little family was. I shared my thoughts of not needing any more children. She was very scared that I would be disappointed. This was one of the few times in our marriage that she was wrong. I was absolutely thrilled. Now, you may have guessed by that setting that we weren't trying to have another child. Well, God decided differently. Just like the boys, we didn't want to know if our next child would be a boy or a girl because we didn't care. Of course, with a house filled with males, Julie was pulling for a little girl, but ultimately it didn't matter. On September 21st, 2006, Jillian Ruth Bettis came into this world. I would like to take you back to the morning she was born. Just like Jack's birth, this day was scheduled since it was a surgery again. We had absolutely no idea if God was giving us a boy or a girl. Just like the boys' births, I sat on a stool up by Julie's head. I was able to hold her hand and talk to her. I couldn't see any of the operations. I was just so glad and blessed to be a part of those days. Dr. Paget and Dr. Einhorn took care of the surgery. Those two men are absolutely amazing to me. Things happen fast in there, too. It seems like it happened so quickly. Dr. Paget is a dear family friend, and I will never forget that moment. He turned to me with a tear in his eye. He knew our family very well and had even delivered Jack. With that tear in his eye, he turned to us and said, "You guys have a beautiful baby girl." Now, my eyes were watering, and I was holding Julie's hand, and she didn't hear what Dr. Paget said. She looked at me and said, "What did he say?" Looking back, I'm actually glad she didn't hear him, because since she didn't hear him say it, I received the honor of telling the woman I loved that we now have a beautiful baby girl. At that point, we laughed and cried as we waited to see that baby girl. Wow, what a beautiful memory. Maybe you're a little confused about how Jillian became Miss May. Her given middle name is Ruth, after Julie's mom. I wanted a little connection to my girl, so I wanted a name just for me. I decided on May for a couple reasons. First, it's my mother's middle name. It also happens to be the month Julie was born. When those two things lined up, I was sold on the name. I added the Miss just for a little flavor. It's usually just May for me. I don't know if it means much to her at all, and maybe she even doesn't like it. We've never really talked about it, but she's aware of what it means to me and where it came from, and that's good enough for me. So now our family had grown to 5. We continued to walk through life and make memories together. The two of our children that picked at each other the most were Jack and Jillian. Those two loved to push and poke at each other. Honestly, it's the same to this day. I guess some things never change. A few of those moments from those days made the family videos too. Looking back, it's kind of funny, and at the same time, it got kind of old. Blessings beyond anything I could ever earn or imagine. Yes, I had those, and I still have them today. Just so you understand the old things that we can have that will continue in our lives, I want to describe something for you. One side of me doesn't want to share it at all. The other side knows I need to. I only want to share them so there's a greater understanding for all of us. If you're in a place like I was in your life, don't give up. Please keep pushing. You will heal. I also want any of you who haven't been in a mindset like this to know how real that kind of life is for many people. Please don't ignore the fact they feel this way. May I explain? Each day, I would leave for work before Julie did. I'd pull out of our driveway, turn left on our county road, and begin my short drive to town. When I would get to a certain point in that road, one thought kept invading my mind. I really don't remember how it began. I don't know how long it stuck around, but I would say for several months. At that point in the road, I would always wonder if Julie and the kids would be better off without me. Now, I realize that's a dangerous statement, so please allow me to clarify. I never, under any circumstances, thought about ending my own life. Not once. I just felt I was such a weak husband, an unworthy father, that growing up without my influence might be better than growing up seeing me like I was. As I said, that's not easy to admit, but I won't deny it. Maybe those feelings faded a little bit each day. How do I know? Well, that was the only time of day throughout the entire day that I would have them. I have no idea why it was triggered there each day. I've thought since then, and even since writing the book, that that's about exactly where I was when Brad told me that they were divorcing and Pineco was ending. Maybe that's why. But it's very real. And despite those feelings, I just kept showing up and putting one foot in front of the other. It wasn't always pretty, but it was effective. So I want to say it again. If that is you now, don't give in to those thoughts of you being less than anyone. One day or one moment at a time, and you will get there. Trust me, I know. It's the main reason I'm offering these feelings outside of my own soul to anyone other than my family. And honestly, I don't really want to do it. One thing that helped pull me through was a small black journal I began keeping. It began as somewhere to write thoughts and feelings I needed to inspire myself, but it was soon filled with quotes, thoughts, and feelings that I now leave to our children. It was at this time in my life that I wrote page 1 in that journal. There are 6 statements on that first page I've shared with others when I knew they were in a time of trial. So I want to share them with you now. Write them down on a note card if they speak to you and put them somewhere that you can see them every day. That was the black book for me, and here they are. Everything may not be perfect in your life, but if you learn to be happy where you are, you may never get to where you want to be. You have to learn to be happy where you are. When you do the right things with the right motives, there is no limit to what God will do in your life. We attract what we continually think about. So think positive thoughts. Shake off anything that hints of self-pity and discouragement, and just find some reason to be grateful. Rather than trying to figure out what everyone else can do for you, start looking for things that you can do for someone else. That one probably helped me the most. And the final one, get up every day, and rather than trying to be blessed, do everything in your power to be a blessing to someone else. Amen to that. During these years, ministry had taken a new place in my life. I'd been asked to speak outside the Baptist church. I was even offered an opportunity to be an interim pastor at a small local church. I'd turned them down for quite a while, but eventually I accepted their offer. They were persistent. While that area of my life seemed to be expanding rapidly, Pastor Brett was working behind the scenes too. He had organized the deacon board, which I was a member of at First Baptist Church. They put together a curriculum for me. I had checked into formal ordination from Baptist churches, but with a wife and a family, it just seemed out of reach. Pastor Brett was aware of my desire to learn more and expand my role in ministry, so he set something up. I was required to write a few papers on different aspects of ministry and present them to the deacon board. After their consideration, they asked me one final thing that they were going to ask me in order to be ordained. It was one condition, that I would continue to pursue education and learning. Then they would present me with a local letter of ordination. Now, it's not a formal ordination of the American Baptist churches, but for me, it's actually more valuable. To me, it was a hand up from a man I love and deeply respect. Pastor Brett and a group of men were in my world, and I loved and respected them and still do. It was my word to them. It was their belief and challenge to me. It was my vow to my Lord and God. So on December 16th, 2007, I was locally ordained by First Baptist Church in Olney, Illinois. I'm at a loss for words, and that's rare. I keep telling you I'm a blessed man. So do you read billboards? There's a great question. I would say I usually do not. The main exception to that would be if I'm traveling with the family and we're looking for the next exit or where to eat or get fuel. We don't live in a large town, but we have a few billboards around. I happened to be pulled over in a parking lot one day when I was working for Dolls. I pulled a 16-foot job trailer most days, and thinking ahead was always required if you wanted to pull over. No one wants to get into a spot and not be able to get back out. As I sat in a parking lot, I happened to look up, and I have no idea why. I'd been in that spot several times and down that particular road hundreds, maybe thousands of times. Honestly, I didn't even know there was a billboard up there. What was on that billboard, and why am I bringing it up? It had a picture of a person that had a tattoo. Well, they had half a tattoo. The other half had been removed with a laser. Now you may be thinking, there's that laser thing again. Exactly. That's what I was thinking too. The fact that things had advanced to the point where tattoos could be removed was interesting to me, though. I didn't sit there long, but I did sit there longer than I needed to. I was in a serious emotional wrestling match with myself as I sat in that parking lot. After my experience with red turning into black, I swore I was finished with lasers and them shooting me in between the eyes on my forehead. I'd continue with red, thank you very much, signed, sealed, forgotten. Well, I guess not really. I didn't make a decision that day, but a seed was planted and began to grow. I ultimately decided it was at least worth a phone call. Now, you may remember that I traveled to St. Louis with Brad for the previous laser surgeries on my birthmark. One thing that was intriguing about this new option was that it was just down in Fairfield, Illinois, about 40 miles away. It was located in a doctor's office and not in a hospital. So you bet I made that call. There was a lady on staff down there that specialized in minor cosmetic laser applications. It's truly amazing what can be done with them. Over the phone, she told me about a local man down there she had successfully removed a facial birthmark from. I was finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Or was it just a train? Again. I made my first appointment. I've wondered since those days if the drive down there wasn't as much therapy as anything that I ever paid for. Please remember, I didn't allow myself hardly any downtime. The hard truth was I was going to have to sit down for 45 minutes to drive down there and another 45 back home. Internally, the battle was getting rid of red versus eating disorder. Now that may sound horrible or even disturbing to you, but that's the life I lived. It wasn't forced on me, and I was getting pretty good at forcing it on myself. I was too good at it, actually. The thought of never having to deal with red won the battle. Plus, I learned that sitting wasn't so bad after all. I listened to some good music and maybe even sang along a little. It reminded me a lot of the days traveling back and forth to Champaign to pick Julie up from school or to drop her back off. It was therapy that I didn't see coming, but it was a blessing in my world for sure. There was a staff member there who was trained on the laser, so she did my treatments. It was a small doctor's office, and I liked that part. The atmosphere there was very kind, welcoming, and warm. I needed those qualities when it came to dealing with red. I began to look forward to those drives and my visits with them. The treatments themselves, they didn't take very long. I would say I was in the chair for 15 or 20 minutes each trip. Based on the local man with the facial birthmark they had already worked on, he predicted that it might take 8 to 12 treatments. I kept at it, and black didn't appear once. The technology had changed, I guess. Now, I won't claim to understand how a laser can affect skin tissue and pigment. I just know that red lightened a little each time, and I was happy with that. Somewhere around appointment 8, my technician went to get the doctor. He came in shortly after, and once again, I had someone pushing around on old Red. Well, I was okay with it this time, since I was there for that reason anyway. But after a short assessment, he slid his stool away from me and made a proposal. The smaller top mark of red was almost squarely in the center of my forehead. Now, it was the smaller of the two marks, but I had noticed the tissue in that area was beginning to have an indentation. I realize that may sound strange, but it's just a fact. The tissue that was once flat now had, and still has, a slight dent-like imperfection in it. As he slid his stool away, he began making a proposal. In the waiting room were plaques and papers showing he was a medic in Vietnam during that conflict. Seeing those made me realize this man had seen things that few people ever will. I wouldn't want to know all the tragedy he had witnessed. If a doctor like that had something to say, well, you can bet I was all ears. So what did he tell me? He suggested that we just remove the lower and larger portion of red. What? Was that even possible? If that was an option, why was this the first time I was hearing about it? My mind raced with all the possibilities and a few questions. Since my technician went out to get him, I assumed she was beginning to see that she couldn't get rid of red the way she wanted to. In a way, I was crushed and disappointed with that reality that red would once again still be in my life. I was a grown man, though, and I felt like having a pity party because that had been the way my life was just going. I was no longer okay with that, though. Yes, my disorder had a hold on me, but that wasn't who I truly was. In fact, I knew deep down I was strong. Living with red had shown me a thing or two about myself. All those thoughts and feelings flooded my mind as the doctor offered his idea. He told me he could remove it and then fold a small layer of the skin tissue in its place. He said it might have a small fold of skin after it healed, but it likely wouldn't be noticeable. The decision was red versus a possible fold. Of course. I would have a few weeks and maybe a few stitches of healing before we could see the final result. But this man wasn't a dermatologist, but I trusted him. I made the decision to make another appointment and return to literally cut red out of my life for good. A week or two later, I was back. I went to a different room this time. He gave me a shot to numb the area, which is a very sensitive area, as I've said before. Imagine a needle, any needle, stuck right between your eyes, on the top of your nose. Yeah, it hurts just thinking about it, doesn't it? The procedure itself didn't take long at all. I didn't feel anything other than a slight tug every once in a while on my forehead. Since the tissue on my forehead was different, that part of red would remain. I exited the office that day and with a few stitches cut right between my eyes where red used to be. I couldn't tell if it was successful or not with all the redness and stitching. I would return days later for removal of the stitches. What happened after the stitches were removed? I don't remember the actual timeline, but I don't think it took long. After the stitches were removed and the healing began, it was soon apparent red was in my life to stay. Yes, it still leaves a lump in my chest today as I talk about it all these years later. Since the skin had been folded over, the shape and some of the size of red is different today. It's a little smaller, but not much. The fold is basically irrelevant, which is good. The doctor did a great job with what he had to work with, and I'm deeply grateful that he took the time. And I'm deeply grateful to his technician and the entire staff. As the weeks passed and Red returned, I realized I'd done all I could do. I was going to have to live with Red, one way or the other. But as I mentioned earlier, even attempting and finding peace in those car rides down there gave me some hope. That crack in the glass was visible to me. I didn't always acknowledge the progress, but I couldn't deny it either. As the days of my life rolled by, I accepted portions of my life and fought like crazy with others. I guess that's the story most people can relate to, though. I put aside the idea of life without Red and tried to see life through a different lens. What would the next chapter of life hold for me? Since this was a major event and another one was on the horizon, I'll end part 4 and go into part 5. That's when an aspect of life came along that I had yet to experience. You will turn the page in this book, but I turned a page in the book of my life.